John? Yep, you're on.
I want to welcome y'all to the 2021-2022 first meeting of the Classics. And I want to extend a special welcome to Janet Stone, who's with Francis, and new members, Jim and Joanne Hubel, and Alexa and Jim Schlimmer, and Anna Farmer. Oh, there she is. As most of you know, the Classics is a group of senior citizens or senior members, and but we're not limited to being seniors, and we're trying to do more of an outreach to reach out to our younger members, and we want to be more intergenerational. And generally, we meet between September and May, except for November, on the fourth Thursday, except for Christmas and Valentine's, for events, learning events, fellowship, and eating a nice meal. And we have realized, particularly through Katie and John, that we are more than just a social group. We have actually evolved into being a ministry. We minister to each other, and we hope to minister to young people, and we are trying to minister more to our other senior adults who cannot come physically to our events. And so this summer, we actually did a field trip over to visit Charlie Waldrop, and John Callaway came. We had refreshments. We had a very good turnout. Charlie Waldrop is 102 years old. We went to where he's living, and it was a wonderful event, and he was just thrilled. And then we also went to visit 101-year-old Nellie Jones, and we went to her home. And we were fully masked and trying to be very careful because the COVID numbers started going back up. But we had a wonderful time. Katie was there on behalf of the church staff, and Justin and James came, and it was just wonderful. And recently, I learned from Thelma Brown that Nellie was so concerned about Charlie Waldrop that Nellie managed to get hold of him recently on the telephone, and Nellie reported to Thelma that Charlie sounded wonderful. So that he's been through quite a lot, and we're just so grateful for that news. We hope that we've given you a Classics directory that has the names of our members, including those who are homebound, along with addresses and telephone numbers, and we would ask after this meeting, sometime when it's convenient for you, if you would consider making a telephone call to some members who weren't able to be here today, or writing them a card. And there are some members in particular that we would request that for, and we'll send out an email giving you the information. But we want to continue developing relationships and reaching out to people. Obviously, we're still in the pandemic, and over the summer, we weren't really sure if we were going to even begin the Classics for this season. And I was minding my own business at my house and got this email from Susanna King, who has catered our meals for us. And Susanna said, "Is the Classics going to get together this year?" And my reaction was, I don't want to deal with this. And so I polled the people who've been on our planning committee in the past. And I said, you know, I've heard from Susanna, what would you like to do about the Classics? And I got the most positive responses, particularly Will Hodges. And it was like, I was almost in tears. It was just so sweet. And people said, yes, the Classics. Yes. So we had a planning meeting at the end of June, and Justin came and was very helpful. And so we planned the events for this year, which are listed in your directory. And so I feel like Susanna King, who's providing our box lunches today around noon, I feel like that somehow God was acting through Susanna. And I told her that when we met over the summer. And she also works over at Wesley Church and works a lot with the senior adults. And she was in tears when I told her that. And so I'm really grateful to her because she helped give us a jump start, and I certainly needed the jump start. And all the enthusiasm of everybody has just been really, really affirming. The members of the planning group are listed in your directory, but Marty Fox, Francis Mills, Ashley Williams, Will Hodges, Shirley Allen, Reed Creaser. I think I've listed everybody. And I really thank you so much for helping us get this going. I also want to acknowledge Abby Belote, our church office manager. She put the directory together, and that used to be the job of James Cubbage, and I left him out of my list of people on the planning group, but he certainly helped. And he helped give the templates to Abby to compile our church directory, and I think she did a beautiful job. And she told me a little secret that John Callaway came up with a theme about classic books that are, I guess, out of Savannah. And so I think it's just fabulous. I wasn't even expecting a theme. I thought we could just kind of throw a book together. And thank you for that. And John and Katie helped work on the book and gave Abby input. So I'm so grateful for that, and to Justin as well. Katie and John have been our co-pastors since May of 2019. And things were really kind of rocking along after they came, and there was a lot of excitement and planning about church activities. And then all of a sudden, around March of 2020, things stopped. And we were in the middle of a pandemic, or the pandemic had just started, or there was an acknowledgement of the CDC. And my cousin said, "Oh, people over 65, they're at risk for this virus called COVID." I didn't even know what she was talking about. That was back in March, and all of a sudden it was a reality. The church closed down, and we adopted these CDC guidelines. And life was crazy after that, at least for me. I'm talking about myself personally. The world, politics, violence, you name it, on top of the pandemic was going on, and we weren't coming to church. And everything was uncertain. And in my life, in my comfortable life, I went through all kinds of emotions, felt out of control, felt sad. I felt kind of lost, lonely, isolated. And I have a home, I have a husband, but something just wasn't right in my life. And I couldn't really pinpoint it. I also felt fear, anger, and I never could understand totally where all these feelings were coming from. But every Sunday, I sat in my recliner chair and I watched the First Baptist Church online services. And all of a sudden, Katie and John's homilies were talking about things that I was feeling. And I would sit there and weep because it was cathartic. It made me feel less alone. It made me realize that we are still a church. And it reinforced the fact that it's okay to have these feelings. And I felt a community presence, even with people's comments on Facebook. On the Facebook Live, people would comment about how beautiful the music was. And James, you did a magnificent job of tying in the themes of the homilies to the music. And Justin, too, participated. And it was just incredible. And it got to where I didn't miss one recliner chair service. I sat there and I would just cry through each service because they were so beautiful. And it helped me so much, and it made me realize that God is present wherever we are. And that is largely due to the creativity and thought of our church staff, Katie and John and James. And I am so, so grateful for that. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Katie and John to talk about ministering during this stressful time. One thing I will add is that coming back to church in person, even watching it on the screen, before there was live choir and live this and live that, was still very rewarding and peaceful. It was like 10 of us in here, but there was something unique about that, very special. And for me personally, the services continue to be a huge comfort.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. And we want to thank Abby for her hard work on the Classics directory that you all have. And we want to thank Justin as well, and James. Justin was doing an interim job at the beginning of the pandemic. What we didn't know was going to be the pandemic. And he helped us at the very beginning throughout and sent us organ videos and piano videos from Rock Hill.
A lot of people forget that Justin started this pandemic with us.
That's right. And then James continued it.
So none of this would have been possible without the team that we have.
That's exactly right.
In Justin and James, Abby and Karen, and let it also not go unsaid, John Rabin, who is chair of deacons in 2020, who held our hand as we were timid about making decisions and timid about coming back. And then obviously Libby McIntosh, who has taken that role this year and just been such a great partner in this ministry for us.
It takes all of us. And this communion set I think, is a good metaphor for the pandemic. If you can see, this communion set is broken throughout, and you're going to see a video in just a second where it shows very quickly how this communion set is broken. But here it is, back together, scars and all, and in my opinion, I think it's more beautiful together. We need to be together. Yeah. And so it is good together today. You've got something you want to say with that.
Emily talked about sitting in her recliner and weeping during our services, and I think the more that we've kind of unfolded the effects of this pandemic on each of us as individuals and on us as a community, the more I look at these pieces that have been put together that I was responsible for them breaking.
And you were responsible
for putting them back together. But the more I look at these, the more I think that these are such a representation of each of us as we unpack the effects of this pandemic, some of which we're not going to really understand for quite some time. Yeah. But this sense of brokenness and being put back together, both individually and as a community, this is an image of our community right here.
That's right. That's right.
That got serious fast.
It did. We're going to keep it light. The first thing that we're going to do this morning is watch a short video. It's 6 minutes long. But it kind of goes the length of the pandemic, and there's some different spots where it goes back and forth, and you'll see different things. We'll point out a couple things as we watch. We'll keep our microphones on. We'll point out where the communion set falls, so you can see that. I think a lot of people probably noticed that happened.
What you're going to see a lot of throughout the beginning of the pandemic, when every week we were having to set up cameras and set up all kinds of stuff before we got this camera system, every week we would come in and set up 3 cameras and all the cables that went with it. And so weekly I would set up a camera to do a time lapse of us doing the setup. And what we didn't know is this would be a really nice artifact for later on down the road, but it is. So you're going to see some of that, some blooper reels, all kinds of stuff.
It'll be fun. It starts off with James Richardson playing piano at his house, and you see how we worshiped from home, and then you'll see the evolution of all of that. So, Justin, if you will, press number 4 and roll that beautiful bean footage.
There's the fall. It just fell. And right there, I'm researching how to fix it.
Started off in G. I want a hug. The Dr. Fauci says no. I want a hug. Yep. That was camp. Youth camp. And we had Trisha Kilgore and Keith Dion and Rebecca Helmuth who helped us with video throughout. And John Rabin got there every Sunday morning early.
Hello,
All right. This was my irresponsible parenting moment.
3. Say it really clearly.
Worship will begin in just a moment. Please.
Sword fighting while writing a sermon.
Do you hear those beautiful sounds? We would love to invite you here to the front steps of our sanctuary this Sunday, October 4th, for a celebration of World Communion Sunday. From 6 to 6:30, you may drop by to receive communion and stay to hear the beautiful sounds from our organ.
James never imagined a handbell practice like that.
Faithful, oh, come on, you faithful. Oh.
Try it one more time.
I can't.
To bring peace among all.
To bring peace among all.
To wave them. There you go. All right. All right, wave them. Wave them around. All right.
He is risen. He has risen indeed.
Go. There you go. All right. Ready? Go. Great. Don't worry, there won't be any sound on it. You can sing anything you want. We're going to pipe in some organ music over top.
This is us preparing for a visit to Margaret Hardy's house.
We should take that on the road again.
Let's talk about this experience.
This was our pandemic pilgrimage.
There are sounds coming out of that tent.
That was our pit stop at south of the border.
Here we are at the Sombrero, at Pedro's.
That's right, south of the border.
Sophie insisted on stopping.
So this will give us a chance to set up the last clip. We came home from a short camping vacation, worn out, trying to set up everything for Sunday morning. And we set up all of the cameras, had everything ready to go, and we needed to film a few things ahead of time. And one of those things we needed to film ahead of time was a welcome video to welcome the whole congregation to worship on that Sunday. So
we made the mistake of bringing our daughter.
That's right. So
this went viral on Facebook, by the way.
For all of your participation.
We'd like to extend a special welcome and a special note of gratitude to Miss Katrina Bostic. Katrina is known and loved by many in our congregation, but if you do not know her, you need to get to know her. She is the executive director of Family Promise of Savannah. She sits on many boards throughout our community, trying to make our community a better place for all Savannahans. We know her through our work with her on the SAGEM Executive Board, that's the Savannah Area Interfaith Justice Ministry. And so we are so grateful to you, Katrina, for filling our pulpit so capably and giving us a word for our series on justice this month.
Friends, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
It's pretty good.
As good as it's going to get.
Oh.
She was being really quiet for a while. We couldn't figure out what she was doing. We thought she was just enjoying her time in the sanctuary.
That's right.
And she was.
That's right.
Let it also be known that John Rabin brought Sophie a pair of swimmies for the baptistry the next week. So she was greatly appreciative of that.
That's right. That's right. It was, that's the lighter side of the pandemic. And we needed some of that lighter side, right? We all needed to find some ways to laugh and to get through. And so I'm glad we could all share that together.
So what we had to do after that little event where Sophie threatened to jump into the baptistry, we had to refilm. We had to re-record, and some of it was you're only going to get it once. So that was the pandemic for us. That has been our experience by and large. We have had to not only get creative, but we've had to think on our feet. and be nimble and willing to accept our imperfections.
That's right. It's forced flexibility.
Forced flexibility. It's like there are some families that have forced family fun, and so it was like forced family fun and flexibility for us.
That's right. That's right. So this whole thing began in March of 2020. Emily was talking about that. We had some pandemic protocols that we had some help from some other churches in putting together, and we presented this as a set of protocols that we hoped we'd never need to get to.
And I think I remember saying on Wednesday night, March 11th, we presented the pandemic protocols at Wednesday night supper, and we went through all 4 of the tiers and all of that. And I remember saying, I don't think it's ever going to come to this, but as long as we have this in place, we'll be all right. We've got a plan. And since we have a plan, it's not going to happen, right? That's how it always works.
So we had a tiered system where we decided we would move up the tiers and figure out how we were going to do social distancing. And then the next tier would be, and I can't even remember what all the tiers were, but we went from 1 to 4 on from Thursday to Friday that quickly. And the world around us, we saw what was happening in New York City at the time, and the world around us was shutting down, and we felt like we needed to follow suit.
And we were the first downtown congregation to close our doors. It was scary.
Yeah.
We were 9 months into our pastorate, and we were the first one to close our doors, and some of the last to reopen. And so for us, that was a really difficult decision, one that was not made lightly, one that was not made alone, right. But one that we did not escape without a few wounds.
That's right. And so whenever this all came up, we just went back to our notes on pandemic protocol from seminary, and we just figured out that we could just, yeah, you all caught that. Yeah, this was a new experience for all of us, and we were trying to figure out how to live and be in this new reality, and here we are. We've made it.
We've made it.
Almost
close.
We're getting closer.
People keep talking about. I've heard multiple times now that the pandemic's over.
Right.
I've heard people in this congregation say, now that we are all vaccinated.
Right.
We're not.
Right.
We go home to a 4-year-old who they haven't even said when she's going to be able to have a vaccination.
Right.
I think about Henry Kilgore, who was sitting in here all Sunday this past week. Our whole congregation is not vaccinated. We are not through this yet.
Right.
And now we're seeing breakthrough cases, which has given all of us who are vaccinated a little bit of a startle. But it has certainly been difficult in that regard, because we kind of had this false start back and thinking that we were a little bit safer once we got vaccinated, and now here we are still masking, still distancing, still being vigilant about washing our hands and all of that good stuff.
And it's September 28th of 2021. James, I looked at you, I remember, because we were trying to figure out Easter, and I said, James, it's okay, we're going to get to it. We may have to postpone Easter a couple of weeks, right? And here we are, September of 2021.
And we still haven't had an in-person Easter service in this building, the two of us.
Right. We still haven't seen St. Patrick's Day. You all keep talking about St. Patrick's Day.
I think this is a big farce.
Right.
I don't think that Savannah actually does St. Patrick's Day. I think y'all told us that to pull us down here. That was a whole big thing that the search committee came up with.
That's right. So as we were trying to figure this out, we wanted to value worship first and foremost, and that meant that we were thinking about 2 main decisions right off the bat.
We made 2 very quick decisions that we had to stick with and that we wanted to stick with. And I'll talk about the first one, John will talk about the second one, but the first one was we made a clear decision early on that we were going to go live every week. Every week we were going to have a live element to our worship service, whether it was the pastoral prayers or the sermon or the welcome. And what ended up happening was most of our service was live. And let me give you an example about why that was significant. Anytime something happens in the news, I remember there was a big shooting on a Saturday night, and John and I came here. This was before the pandemic. John and I stood right here first thing on Sunday morning and spoke a word of peace and a word of comfort about that shooting. We wanted to make sure that if something happened after, through the week, after some pastors had filmed their services,
Right.
that we were able to speak to that moment, because you all were going through enough with the pandemic to have one more thing that was not addressed in a pastoral way on a Sunday morning. So we wanted to go live every week, to have a moment to at least just give you a sense of peace about whatever was going on in the world. And if you remember everything with George Floyd, it all blew up on a Thursday evening. And we had many, many pastor friends who had already recorded their services and could say nothing to the moment when that happened. And we were so grateful that we were able to speak in some way pastorally during the pastoral prayer that particular Sunday about what was going on with the protests and with Ahmaud Arbery and various other incidents that happened throughout the year.
That's right. We got really lucky in that with the technology side, that we had already had a camera in the back. We had already moved to having 2 cameras for a live stream. And so having that element already in place really, really helped us to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we decided right off the bat as far as worship goes was that our attention span only lasts for a little while whenever you're watching something online, right? Whenever you're watching TV or something like that, you've got a few minutes to get everything in. And we were thinking, a 20-minute sermon watching on a computer seems a little bit too much. And so what we immediately shifted to were 2 homilies. And that way our church could hear 2 voices, both of our voices, every Sunday, and it could fit our attention spans for watching online, which was the only method of worship that we all had. So I'm really happy that kind of happened and that we've been comfortable with that. And I think it's something that's helped us both speak to more lectionary passages together, but it's also something where Katie speaks about one thing and I'll speak about another thing, and then Ashley Williams actually pointed this out, that there's this third thing that happens whenever those 2 are kind of in conversation with each other. And that third thing, I think, is the Spirit moving, right? You hear something different. There will be connections. And I think that's what we've been so blessed with as a congregation, is you all have had ministers, particularly ministers who focus on worship with James and Justin, who tie it all together, even with the music. Everything has a purpose. Every reflection has a purpose in that, and even down to what's chosen for a responsive reading. There's some way that's connecting throughout the whole service.
Right.
So there's a larger picture that happens with that too.
Yeah. So that was kind of the 30,000-foot view at changes we made immediately. But when you look at our jobs on the daily level, our jobs completely changed. The job that we were doing in February of 2020 is completely different than what we were doing most of 2020 and a good part of this year. Maybe you should talk about the changes that you kind of took on, and then I'll talk about, as a result, the changes that I took on.
Sure. I think one of the rules that we've always followed in sermon writing is you spend an hour's worth of preparation and an hour's worth of work on each minute of the sermon. That's what the goal is. So whenever we were doing 20 minutes of sermon, we were trying to do 20 hours of work to back that up. the two homilies helped us both figure out, because there were new things that came along. That same rule of thumb applies to video. So as we are creating videos that are almost 60 minutes long in some parts, you've got the 10-minute live sections, so 50 minutes or 40 minutes. You're supposed to spend an hour per every minute of video editing.
Go ahead and add that up.
Right. So that was every week, and trying to figure out.
And ask yourself, does Katie have any video editing skills? The answer is no. And so ask yourself, who might be the one on the staff to do that?
Right. So, but we each shifted, and there were things that you took on that were part of my description that changed.
John
everything.
took on the lion's share of the video editing. Virtual choirs, all the readings, and anytime we did any, services that had been put together and compiled, the Amen video that got very popular, the Palm Sunday video, the Christ is Risen video, all of those videos were his baby. And so because he was so consumed with making sure that was excellent, as is our standard, there were some other things that I needed to pick up in the meantime, and we kind of did it without even really talking about it.
No, we just naturally
fit into where it was needed. And so I started taking over planning kind of the narrative of worship. And what we ended up taking on was kind of a monthly sermon series type approach to preaching. And what that did for us was it created a narrative of worship that took you out of whatever was happening at the time and connected the 2 weeks, consecutive weeks to one another. Because what we were finding was that memory was so difficult during the pandemic. It was hard to remember what day it was. And so to have the worship services telling a story over the course of several weeks was really a useful step for us in engaging you in a different way according to the context that we were in. And so I started developing those sermon series, and then that turned into kind of me writing the narrative for at least the preaching side of worship, and then obviously James and Justin were on the liturgical, musical side of everything and helping to bring all of those ideas to fruition. And then the other role that I took on was being the pandemic protocol person.
Yeah.
And I became
the armchair
epidemiologist.
Yeah.
I went to several epidemiology workshops with other pastors, virtually, of course. And so I kind of had to be the bad guy and no, we need to still be wearing our masks. We need to still be doing these things because these are the data, and this is how to interpret them. And so that's kind of where my job shifted.
It's funny that you studied in undergrad. You started off in what science?
Chemistry.
Yeah, chemistry. And you were thinking kind of medical route.
Yeah, and I hated it.
And I studied, my major was industrial technology education, but what that meant was that was the way for me to teach broadcast journalism in middle schools.
So for the first time in our marriage,
yeah, I got to use
your
my
education
degree.
Was helpful.
It helped, yeah, same with the sciences side of that.
Yep.
All in all, we had to figure out these new roles and learn as we were making decisions, and then also making a group of decisions. We are a Baptist church, so trying to figure out how what decisions need to be made on this level, what decisions need to be made with diaconate, what decisions need to be made full congregation, and it was difficult. There's nothing in any of our manuals, in any of our bylaws about pandemic protocol.
Yeah,
there was nothing.
And a lot of these decisions had to be made quickly.
Right.
And so they couldn't be made by an entire congregation because Sunday would come around, and that could be the Sunday if we hadn't had our congregational vote that somebody got exposed to this virus.
Right.
And so a lot of this, had to. The deacons have been incredibly helpful in making decisions about the pandemic. In fact, the deacons were involved in making a decision about today. So,
Right.
yeah.
How we were going to do the classics. So, Katie, I think it's time to talk about the embodiment of the church.
Yeah, so we want to spend the last few minutes talking about some of the lessons we learned that we're going to carry into the rest of our vocational careers. And I think that inform how we understand church today. One of the lessons that we learned, one of the big lessons, was that the church is embodied. The church is embodied, E-M-B-O-D-I-E-D. Meaning, we always talk about the church is the body of Christ. Well, there's something that's essential to that, and that's our bodies. During the pandemic, we became disembodied. Our essence was in the little Zoom square, or on the square or the rectangular computer screen that was sitting in your living room. And so what this did was it took out a lot of body language. It took out a true engagement with a person that set us up for some different difficulties throughout the pandemic.
Right. There was no pastoral care via Zoom class either.
No.
These kinds of things, we were prepared for embodied ministry, where we read body language whenever we are trying to be present with one another.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, and like holding people's hands at their
Exactly.
hospital beds. That's not something you can do on Zoom. And that's part of the tragedy of this pandemic with people dying alone in their hospital rooms, not being able to hold their loved ones' hands. And so a lot of our approach to ministry is we want to be place sharers with you, like we talked about this week. And that's not possible when anybody could be contagious, right?
Right.
We didn't want to infect you, and we didn't want you to infect us.
So our goal throughout was to create as familiar of an experience as possible, recognizing that it can't. Every Sunday there's somebody who comes in who hasn't been in a while who says, oh my gosh, it's completely different being in the room, hearing the organ. You cannot mimic all of those different experiences. So our goal in all of this is to make it as familiar as possible for you to have an embodied experience as best you can outside of the physical body.
And and there was this assumption along the way that because John and I are young, that we enjoyed this digital world.
Right. Yeah.
It got us through.
Yes, I'm grateful.
But we did not get a lot of joy from all of the work. I mean, it was probably 4 times as much work. And so know that, we were pushing for us to, remain digital for a while when, we hadn't gotten our vaccines yet and play it safe in terms of social distancing and all of that. That was not because we were enjoying it. It was because we wanted to keep everyone safe.
Right. As best we possibly could.
Yeah.
And control the things that we all could control together.
Exactly.
Because didn't this whole thing feel like we were out of control? Like there was something beyond all of us that was happening that was just beyond any of our control with it.
Yeah.
So recognizing the context is always important, and that's something that we were taught in seminary. And so thinking about contextual ministry in this time has been really fascinating.
When our context was taken out from underneath us. Right.
Exactly.
And so a lot of what we did theologically and philosophically, and this is probably not of interest to you, but was to try to create a context where we had none anymore. Try to create a body where we had no bodies, in this digital world. It was really hard. And it caused a lot of conflict. Thinking larger than First Baptist Savannah, lots of church conflict is happening right now. Lots of pastors are leaving the pastorate. I started out in the pandemic, and a group of 5 other co-pastor women, and 2 have left ministry and 1 has gotten a divorce. Not very good odds. So a lot of people have left ministry, a lot of churches are in high conflict, but I truly believe that a lot of that is because we didn't have our normal ways of dealing with conflict.
Right.
Because we were disembodied. We couldn't say, okay, you disagreed with something in the sermon, let's get together and talk about it, and let's talk about all the work that went into that one sentence that we're not seeing eye to eye on. We didn't have that. And so then the anger and conflict bottled up. And what we saw a lot of, nationally I'm talking about, is when people came back together, it was like a pressure cooker. And it exploded. And a lot of churches have gone through a lot of really terrible times since reopening.
Yeah. And you think about everything that has happened in our country. Let's just take our country alone over the last year. First off, pastors hate election years because election years are when everybody is just kind of, there's this rub, and people are not nice during election years. But then it was election year in pandemic, with a racial awakening happening in the middle of our country.
Where we have no context, and where we have no bodies. And it was just, there was a lot there.
Right. This would, in any other time other than pandemic, we would have probably been out to coffee with as many people as possible every single day to try and talk through what everybody was experiencing, because it was a lot for all of us. And in that, there was this kind of sense, and I'll just be honest here, there was a kind of sense that with the disembodiment, with not having the normal context, with not being prepared for really how to do this, there was a sense always in our minds, like we're missing something, we're failing, we're having a hard time with this. What do we do? That was the question all the time. And that was not just in church. That was also in parenting. We had to pull our 3-year-old at the time out of school. She was at Wesley Monumental, and not school, but out of pre-K.
And we felt like this was a very important decision for us.
Yeah.
Not only were children seen as vectors in the whole pandemic, but Wesley Monumental had gone back to worship. And we did not feel like it was time for us to go back to worship. This was last June of 2020.
Yeah.
And so we felt like it would be disingenuous of us to say, we don't need to go back yet, while we were simultaneously sending our child to a church that was back.
Right.
And so we made that decision, and God, thank you for my parents who have taken a big role in making that possible over the course of the last year and a half. But we made that decision as a family, not only to keep Sophie safe, but also as pastors to help our actions be consistent with what we were saying. So we pulled her out, and we were responsible for Sophie, and she would come to work with us, and poor James and Justin, neither of them really knew what they were getting into with having her here. And it was a lot. And there were times when it felt like we were failing the church and failing Sophie at the same time. And that was the worst.
And I think whenever we're talking about the routines being completely upended, I think that's probably a familiar feeling to a lot of people,
right,
where you feel like this isn't what it used to be, this isn't what it used to be, this isn't what it used to be, and all across the board,
right,
it's difficult.
Right.
We wanted to share that with you all, not as a way to say, oh, feel sorry for us. It was a way to say, like, the things that you experienced, the loss, those kinds of things. I've heard someone say, generationally, it affects this generation more than it affects this generation. And I just don't think that's true. I think all of us have experienced this loss in our own ways. And I mean, we have a child who's 4 years old now. She spent almost half her life with a mask on. I mean, just think about that. That's not something that I would have ever thought of.
Right.
But I think each group is trying to figure it out along the way, and I don't know if any group had an upper hand in that. I think we all just had a really hard time with it.
So we're going to end on a good note.
Yes.
We're going to end by talking about, we've spent a little time talking about the adversity. But with adversity comes creativity.
That's right.
And so we have shared this with people, but in the last year and a half, it has been one of the most creative times in our life. It started with us coming up with this weird idea. We noticed that the worship services were shorter because we had less singing. And so we thought, okay, well, we're going to sit here in the pews and we're going to type on our phone and engage with the people who are on Facebook watching us live. And so we started doing that. We would sit here in silence for 15 minutes in the pews on both sides, and we'd just sit there on our phones and talk to people who were engaging with us on live stream. Well, one day that turned into, we were sitting in the back. It was sometime close to Pentecost. We were sitting in the back. That was when we had the cameras back there kind of facing this direction. And John leaned over at me during the sung response, which comes right before the end of the service. And he said, let's do it live this time. Literally like a minute before we turned the cameras back on. And so I said, okay, let's do it live. And we did it live. And people loved it. We started talking about the kind of what didn't make the sermon. And at the same time, we were talking with a digital coach from Riverside Church. And he saw that video of us doing it for the first time, and he said, I love this. He said, you need more of this, which led us
to Talking Toast. We were trying to figure out what to do on a Wednesday night, to a way to include and to talk about sermons, to talk about Bible study that's happening. And his name is Jim Keat. You saw him preach during our
Easter series.
Our series leading up to Easter. And Jim said, you need something that's just that on a nighttime in a different spot. And so we sat down and talked about it a little bit, and what came out of that was Talking Toast. Yeah. And Talking Toast was something where Jim said, look, if you get 12 people to watch Talking Toast, then you're doing really well. Well, that first one, we had 2,000 people watch Talking Toast. And I don't understand what they saw in it, but, they did. And that's not even the one that's gotten the most views.
Right.
There's been others that have gotten 3,000 and 4,000 views on those.
It's been really fascinating to watch that develop, and it's something that we look forward to now. And I know that there have been church members who have approached us about looking forward to that time. Yeah. Another notable creative punch we had was the pandemic pilgrimage, which you saw video from south of the border.
Yeah.
We did not go to a pilgrimage to south of the border.
No.
That was just a pit stop.
Although we did get out of the car and we said, is this Boston? No, sweet girl.
So I will never forget that moment. We had this pandemic pilgrimage that we were listening to NPR one day on our way home from church, and there was a teacher on there who was talking about knowing that her students were going to be virtual in the coming year. So over the summer, she spent weeks traveling to different locations that she was going to teach about in her history class and filming herself teaching in those locations. And I looked over at John, and he looked at me, and we both had the same idea. And I said, John, I think we can do this. And within like 2 hours, we had sent out emails to John Rabin to ask permission from the deacons to be gone for this 10 days, I think it was. And then to all of the pastors that we engaged with along the way, preaching in these historic churches. And it ended up being a whirlwind of a trip.
It was.
We each preached 5 sermons in 10 days, and preached and wrote those 5 sermons in 10 days. It was wild. We had John's mother with us to help with Sophie, and oh my goodness, it was a whirlwind, but what a gift it was.
It was life-giving, yeah. And what we were hoping with that, and with the same thing with the Delightful Church project that you took on, what we were hoping with that is to connect with other groups of people to say, hey, we're not alone in this. There are others that are going through this exact same thing that we are. There are other Baptists that are going through these same things. And that, I think, helped us connect in a deeper way.
Exactly.
So that was also life-giving on that front. All right, it's 12 o'clock.
It is 12 o'clock. We were going to share an exorcism story, but we're not going to. But if you want to hear about the exorcism I performed yesterday, you are more than welcome to stop me afterward.
I think we've got to say it now.
Okay.
You can't leave off the exorcism.
You all know that this will be the abridged version. How about that? You all know that we have had increased security protocol around. And so our protocol in the education building is that when you arrive at the door, you call the office, and then Abby and one other person will come to the door and make sure that it's safe and bring you in. Well, Abby got a call yesterday from somebody who sounded as though they knew that they were supposed to be at First Baptist Church yesterday. And so she went to the door and let this person in. And it was a family, a mother, a daughter, and not really sure if it was a brother or a boyfriend. That's not clear and not essential to the story. So this woman started explaining to Abby, who had just accidentally let this person in, that her daughter had become possessed with a demon while on a history tour. And they had been turned away at the Catholic Church, and they needed to talk to a pastor. And so Abby came into my office just dying of laughter at the fact that she accidentally let this person in. And we are not making light of this, I promise. So I came out, and the first thing I noticed was that the girl, the person who had this experience, had no shoes on. And so I just kind of noted that in the back of my head. I started talking to her and told her, I have some limitations, and one of the things that I've learned as a pastor is to know your limitations. And I said, I would love to refer you to some very good therapists I know in the area if that's something that interests you, if you feel like that will help. Trying to, help her out in that regard. And she declined that help, but said that she would like to go sit in the sanctuary, and because it was triggered by her being close to churches, she would have this violent reaction. She was carrying a stock pot, and she would start vomiting. So I came and let her in the sanctuary and told Abby she had to come with me because I wasn't going to be alone with these people. And Abby sat in the back, and we both kind of joked that, if this girl, she sat right here, if she vomited on this carpet, Justin Addington was going to have a cow.
Yes.
And so we were...
Speaking of Justin and I were making the bank run, and we were walking back, and we noticed that the lights were on the sanctuary. And we said, you know what? I don't remember those lights being on whenever we left. I said, I'm going to go check it out, and maybe Justin, he'll head to the education building. And so I walk in right here, and Katie is sitting in this chair, and there are these three people sitting right here, and Katie gives me the something crazy just happened look.
So I had prayed for them.
And I said, Katie, what's going on? And you said, I just prayed for these people, very kindly. And I said,
tried to keep it together.
And I said, oh, good. Where are you folks from? And they said, Florida. And I said, enough said. And then I walked up the choir loft and said, I'm going to go get some things done in the choir loft while you're...
And he had nothing to do in the choir loft.
No.
But by the way, the demon, I forgot to tell you this, the demon had taken this girl's shoes.
Yeah.
So there's a square somewhere where the demon had taken the shoes, and the shoes remain in that square. But we tell you all of this to tell you, first of all, an encounter like that would not be one where they would be sitting over here and I would be sitting over there normally. Normally that would be an encounter that you would want to be close to one another. Secondly, that kind of stuff happens in a downtown church. We understand that. But the absurdity of the daily rhythm around here has been very different during the pandemic. We've gotten a lot more of that kind of stuff than this kind of stuff. And so we tell y'all that to show you the magnitude by which our ministries have changed. And I'm not going to do any more exorcisms for the rest of the year.
That was good. Well, friends, thank you all for being a part of this today. And I think we should have a blessing before we have our meal. Is that okay, Ashley?
And if y'all have any questions about this, we were going to open the floor, but we were too talkative. And if y'all have questions about anything we shared, you feel free to come and, find us.
Let's pray together. Loving God, thank you for the ability to be together. Wherever we are, there are people watching at home still right now who do not feel safe enough to be in this building. There are people here who are embodied in person. We ask for your presence to be felt by all of us, wherever we are, whoever we are. Be with us today as we go and continue to be your servants in this world, and bless the food that we partake, and bless the hands that prepared it. Help it to be nourishment for our bodies and for our souls. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen. I think you might have instructions for us.
It's hard to know what to say after a presentation like that. It's pretty much impossible to have an adequate follow-up after such a remarkable presentation that has given us a lot to think about. Let me just quickly read you one verse from Hebrews. I don't often go dipping into Hebrews, but I had occasion to look up a phrase not too long ago, and I found the verse in which it occurs, which is in the 13th chapter of Hebrews, and it's verse 17. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so that their work will be a joy and not a burden. Thank you profoundly. And thank you to the wonderful grandparents Sophie picked out before she got here. I think we need to invite you back at some point to have chapter 2. So, and hopefully that's when the pandemic is sort of a fairly distant memory in the rearview mirror. We will have lunch. We will go over to the other building, over to the educational building, and I think we're supposed to enter from the McDonough Street side. And then you'll be walking just straight through the building, through the hallway. We'll ask you to allow for social distance so that we don't all bunch up. We Baptists like to be together, and we have a habit of bunching up. So let me ask you today to be aware of that and to allow 6 or 8 feet between each person as you go. We want to keep these numbers coming down. And at the Hull Street side, you will exit the building and then turn around and open your arms, because Emily and Abby will give you lunch if you have purchased lunch, if you want to do that. And they have bags that they will put the boxes in. I found that at my advanced age, I like having a basket or a bag. It's easier to carry something. So you'll get your lunch in a bag, in a box, and then, or first in the box, then in the bag, and then walk across the street or wherever your car is. Does that make sense? We were trying to make this easy for people. And since I'm such a klutz, I was kind of like the example of, if we've got Ashley Williams, she might fall out of the door while she was picking up her lunch. So we'll ask you to step down at the Hull Street side, go out of the door right there, but just stay right there, and they'll hand you your box. Okay? Does that make sense? Thank you all so much for being here. It's a joy to see you.
Let me add, if y'all are wanting to eat together, we ask that you do it somewhere outside. The square behind the education building is a great place to go. The courtyard is filled with the staff's cars to make room for you all in the parking lot. So please make the inside just a passageway. And if you're going to eat together, eat in the square.